One of the things that I think is really exciting about this is that it's an opportunity to work on something over a really extended period of time. Far too often in schools, we try to do things in ways which are far too quick to ever be realistic. And having 2 years to really attack this is, I think, a really good opportunity. I was drawn to a little bit in the introduction to Jeff Barton's Don't Call It Literacy, where he's talking about the kind of collective sigh that you might get if you mention that you're going to do some CPD around literacy in a staff room, and people saying things like, oh, haven't we already done that? And he says, if we had done literacy, we wouldn't have youngsters who misread basic written accounts of events, who haven't the resilience to read to the end of a text of, say, 800 words, and who lack the strategies that you and I would take for granted in reading a leaflet for specific advice, scanning, or an article for the gist, skimming, or who would think the idea of sitting down with a book in their hands an alien and perverse activity. So that's something about why this is important, why it's still an ongoing issue for the students in our schools. I don't think any of us could honestly say that we've achieved literacy. We've got literacy to a point where, probably in any school in the country, where it really should be. And just to go back to that point about English, and it's not just about English, it seems to me that literacy is about speaking, listening, writing, and reading. And that combined, those are the components of thinking. And thinking is something that's important in all subjects. And I don't think any head of department or any teacher is likely to say that thinking isn't relevant to them. So, as we said, this isn't on one-off. It's ongoing. It's going to last 2 years. And it's about participants working together as part of this group to challenge one another and improve their planning and their implementation of the work that they want to do to improve literacy in their own schools. It's very much about a collaborative enterprise. Could you just go on to the next slide, please, Vanessa? So Mobilise requires leadership, support and engagement. All my experience tells me that things don't work unless they've got support from leadership. When I was working for CFBT, I wrote the rooted in reading resources, sorry, can't get my words out. And as part of that, I wrote a research report which looked into what made it effective in some schools. And one of the key things that seemed to make the difference to whether it impacted on the amounts of reading that happened was the amount of support from leadership that it got. So that's a really key element. This isn't going to have any impact unless it's got support from the highest possible level within the school. And the school-based lead needs to be somebody who's got some clout, and also probably needs to have the head's ear in order to be able to implement the changes that they may need to make. Literacy needs to be something that's part of the ADP, or it's going to be sidelined. If it's not part of the school's priorities, then whoever the person is who's acting as the school-based lead isn't going to be able to get things changed. And it's going to need resources of time, energy, and probably money in order to make things different, make things better. You can't expect somebody to just be a sort of lone warrior making these changes. It needs that kind of support. And within the school, both within the cluster and within the group of people who are going to be working on this, we need a sense of collective endeavour, and that needs to transfer into the school. So it's a major improving literacy. We know it's been attempted before loads of times within schools, with sometimes greater and sometimes lesser success. So it is a major and daunting challenge, and at a time now where we've got massive other major and daunting challenges. But on the other hand, if we're successful, it can have the rewards could be huge. It could lead to improved teaching and learning in all our subject areas. It could lead to better exam results across all subjects. It could lead to better communication in school and out of school, resulting in improved mental health for not only our students but for our teachers as well, I think. And therefore better life chances for our young people, their economic, social, political and emotional health could benefit from all this and from this work. And I don't think there's ever been a time when that's been more important. So if we move on to the structure, as Vanessa's already said, there'll be 10 sessions. And they will run across the 2 years, and that gives us a really serious amount of time to get things moving and to develop things, and to really begin to build these ideas up and hone the plans and adapt them as we're going through the 10 sessions, and build in the outcomes from the reading and the research that we look at as we go through. We can move on to the next slide, actually, please. Have we jumped to there? Is there a what is? Well, it doesn't matter. So a PLC is going to involve a piece of reading, a piece of research. We'll go on to look at what some of those might be in a minute, and then it will involve. Right. Sorry, right. Okay. Which one are we going for? That one. Right. Okay. So these are the EEF Improving Literacy in Secondary School recommendations. As you can see, there are 7 of them, and that lends very neatly to the focus for the first 7 of the 10 sessions. My plan is that the last 3 we will leave until we get to that point, and we'll see what the needs of the group are, and we'll then tailor them to meet the needs of the group. The first one is about the whole concept of disciplinary literacy, which is quite a new concept in the UK, at least. I don't think it was widely discussed before the report came out, and we will. I think we probably skipped over that slide, but basically in that first session, we'll spend quite a bit of time looking at and talking about that piece of research from which the idea of disciplinary literacy emerged, and we'll talk about things like, what does good geographical writing look like or sound like? What does clear scientific speech sound like? What does it mean to listen like a historian? And how can schools and how can teachers model those things in ways which enable students to understand them and to better achieve them themselves? The scope of the recommendations is huge. They cover all of the main elements of literacy. They cover vocabulary, reading, writing, speaking and listening. Listening often a bit left out, a bit of a poor relation, really, it seems to me. And then finally move on to intervention. So a whole gamut of skills there that make up secondary literacy, but also the skills which are so vital for effective learning in every secondary subject. One thing I'd like to pull out of all this is the interrelatedness of these skills. So the relationship between speaking and writing, and particularly that idea that boys in particular need to be able to rehearse their ideas in speech first before going on to writing. The relationship between reading and writing, and how far too often we ask students in school to write something without asking them to read examples of that same kind of writing first themselves. And the relationship between reading and speaking, and how do we read something and then talk about it in an effective way. So literacy is a complex and nuanced system, and it's going to take time, and we need to give students time to nurture those skills. As I say, the plan is to be responsive to the group's needs in the last 3 sessions, focusing on things that come out in the first 7 as being areas of general concern that are worth spending additional time on. Could we go back to this one that's headed structure of PLC sessions, just to look at that in a bit more detail? Yeah, that's the one. Okay, so the normal structure for the PLCs from number 2 onwards anyway, when people are coming with a plan themselves, is that we will spend some of the time focusing on their plans, getting people to talk about the plans that they've got, what are their school priorities in terms of literacy, and what progress have they made since the previous session? What have they done in terms of implementing their plans since then? And the aim will be to get everybody contributing to the group and the discussion, feeding in ideas that will improve the plans going forward and help everybody to make sure that their work is as good as it possibly can be. This is very similar to the model that we used during the course of last academic year for the peer improvement pathway. I was a hub lead for the LTSA schools and worked with 2 clusters of schools working on planning, implementation and development of their own plans through the PIP. And this is very similar kind of model, people working with each other to improve their plans. Then in each session we'll then be talking about the particular EF recommendation that we're looking at in that session. There'll be some reading which will have been done beforehand, short piece of work. It could be a piece from a book, it could be a blog, it could be something well, that's probably what it's likely to be, a piece from a book or a blog. But it'll be fairly short, it'll be accessible, but it will hopefully pose some questions and pose introduce some new thinking, which will facilitate and enable people to think about their own plans and think about maybe ways in which they could develop their plans in order to incorporate these ideas. So there'll be time to discuss, facilitate a discussion of that piece of reading and how it might link to what's going on in their own particular schools that are present. Okay. Can we jump down to the one that says plan for PLC 1? Yeah. So PLC 1 will be slightly different, as I've said before, because people will be coming in from a slightly different perspective. So they may not have plans at this point. So we'll talk about what are the school's shared literacy priorities. We'll share the school's literacy priorities, and it'll be interesting to see how varied they are, whether they're all quite similar or whether they're very different. And then, as I mentioned before, we'll focus on that particular piece of work by Shanahan, what is disciplinary literacy and why does it matter? The focus will be on sharing, beginning to understand each other's priorities, as it's only in this way that we can begin to have positive impact on each other's work. I was struck by this sentence that I read in a book recently about the emotionally intelligent office, but I think it's relevant to this. Our acceptance of the dignity and role of collaboration should be founded on a basic recognition of the fact that big tasks demand a symphony of different skills. And the people who are going to be part of this will be all bringing their different skills to the group and contributing to the development of each other's plans. So in this first PLC, there'll be extended reading around the issue of disciplinary literacy and also some discussion about what it means to be part of a CLC. I think this next slide, how it's going to quite work. It was, all right, okay. I'd put in a load of animations so each of these came up one at a time, but there we go. So as well as the research referenced in the report, during the CLCs, we'll use a range of other stimulus materials. We'll look at things like blogs by Barbara Blyman and James Duran, who've written extensively about the role of knowledge and the role of vocabulary in understanding and reading. Blogs by people like Ian Cushing on how schools police language use, and excerpts from important books on literacy, and you can see some of the possible ones there. Trying to cover quite a wide range. So we've got books, obviously the very almost ubiquitous Quigley books on vocabulary and reading gaps. Lemov is very interesting on reading, particularly the importance of reading aloud and the importance of reading non-fiction in classrooms. Marianne Wolf writes very interestingly about how we build more resilient readers, and how she feels digital literacy needs to be developed in parallel with other forms of literacy, because otherwise we're in danger of creating a whole load of young people who just don't have the resilience to read longer texts. The Writing Revolution, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and that has some very interesting ways in which Hockman in America has developed very useful little techniques for improving the effectiveness of students' writing that can be applied in a whole range of different subjects. And then at the bottom, and because it's important not to forget, which perhaps they shouldn't be at the bottom therefore, not to ignore speaking and listening. I think it's perhaps tends to be a bit ignored sometimes. We've got the English Speaking Union there and Voice 21, both of which are involved in the development of speaking and listening within schools and have important things to say contribute to that debate. So we'll cover some of their materials as well. So we'll touch on key writing linked with the main elements of literacy, and hopefully those will all then begin to be involved in schools' plans as we move forward.